Hey everybody, welcome live here inside of our Facebook group, Power Up Your Innate Potential, where we are going to be talking about being aware of the walking wounded. Yep, that's our topic today, continuing along our series of videos where we are helping you understand narcissistic defenses and the behaviors that are used by those who are working out of their narcissistic self-protective approach. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Heather Dranitsaris-Hilliard, and I am one of the co-founders inside of this group. I am an expert in organizational development and behavioral change, and we have lots of stories for you here today as we talk about this particular approach to narcissistic defenses. Stories that I can bring you both from my client environment, from my own personal life, because as we have been saying all along is when we are talking about these narcissistic defenses, they are present in everyday life, right? I mean, you see them, you experience them. If you haven't had a chance yet to catch some of our other videos where we introduce this idea about narcissistic defenses to you, really help you understand the difference between narcissistic personality disorder and the use of these defenses, really encourage you to go check those out either on YouTube or here inside of the Facebook group. We're helping you with this series to really be able to identify when people are using narcissistic defenses, because that will help you. It'll help you in terms of how you choose to respond versus react. It will allow you to keep your power and your authority rather than giving it away in response to these defenses. So today we're talking all about the walking wounded, right? And we all know these, right? We've all encountered these folks where we ask them a question and they react as though we've accused them of something. Or maybe we make a matter-of-fact statement and it was met with tears because of our insensitivity or how unfair we're being, right? You know what I'm talking about. You've had those situations where the reaction that you received from the person on the other end was as though you had done them some grave harm, and that's the walking wounded. You're not alone, right? If you've had these experiences, if you've interacted with this kind of behavior, you are not alone because most of us have to deal with the walking wounded. Some of us, depending on whether or not that behavior is present in our personal lives or at work, we actually may be dealing with the walking wounded a lot, right? And walking wounded are essentially those people who use narcissistic defenses to regulate their self-esteem and their image of themselves, okay? So whether that's at work, whether it's in personal relationships, and that's really important to understand, we see these defenses in all environments, right? It's not just limited to our personal life. It's not just limited to work. But when we see that, when we have that experience of the walking wounded, we're really at a loss, right? It's like, why are they behaving like I'm out to get them? I didn't expect for that reaction to happen. Now, interestingly, in the workplace, though, of course, leaders actually have to deal with employees who are hypersensitive to criticism and feedback and who tend to take things personally, right? And that's what we're talking about, right? This excessive personalization, but then the putting it back on us as though we've really set out to do them intentional harm. Employees, on the other hand, in the workplace, they have to deal with leaders who can't define things and who won't then deal with things or take responsibility when things go wrong. So the walking wounded shows up in a number of different ways in our environments. We see leaders starting to expect less of employees and employees who take responsibility for things and apologize for things even when they haven't actually done anything wrong. Now, when we think about how this behavior shows up at home, well, it's completely different. We can get into long, drawn-out arguments because we feel misunderstood. We can get on the defensive. There's all sorts of ways it plays out in our interactions in our personal lives. And it's really, really empowering to understand this behavior and understand how to respond to it differently so that you don't get pulled in. And that's what these sessions are, in these training sessions, these workshops, videos are all about. So why is this so common? Why are we talking about this so much? Well, the reality is that almost everyone, myself included, everyone has a narcissistic wound. And that's one of the things I find really interesting about prepping for and thinking about the conversations we're going to have here in these videos is I have to reflect on my own behavior. I have to recognize it's like, oh, I remember when I did that. Oh, I've seen myself do that in that situation. So again, it's normal. We see this, we experience it, and we come together to talk about it so that we can really understand it and change the way we respond to it in our dynamics, okay? So let me go back. Almost everyone here has a narcissistic wound. And so because of that, we use self-protective narcissistic defenses to help protect us from our own vulnerabilities and to allow us to avoid intimacy. So this is a tool, a self-protective tool that we bring out. It's a defense. It's a way of protecting ourselves that, again, keeps us from feeling and experiencing whatever that vulnerability is, but it also gets in the way of intimacy in our relationships when we're using them. Now, the walking wounded is really akin to the victim persona or archetype. Right? In the victim persona or archetype, what they do is they use a number of different survival behaviors. Victim, victimizer, or rescuer. Interesting combination, right? Victim, so being the victim or acting like or behaving like you're the victim. Victimizer, where you're actually on the defense or on the offense, and victimizing others in that interaction. Or rescuer, and going in and using that rescuer orientation, again, to put all of the attention on the other people so we don't have to feel vulnerable, so that we allow ourselves to be protected. And it's, again, this is all about making sure that we don't get hurt the way we did when we were young, right? That's what that narcissistic wound is all about. And so we want to make sure that we don't experience that. We don't experience the hurt. But the challenge is when we're not aware, when we're not focused on our development, we're not working towards our potential, we can get stuck in using these self-protective strategies that we resorted to during our childhood to ensure our psychological survival. So that while there was a point in time where using these defenses was absolutely appropriate for us, as we grow, as we develop, as we mature, as we develop, let me go back to the word develop, as we develop and become self-aware, we're having to look at some of these defenses and say, do they serve our needs, okay? So what is this session all about? Well, we're gonna talk about how the narcissists, or those using narcissistic self-protective behavior, or what we call the walking wounded, often present as victims. And because they present as victims, they pull other people in, right? And they cause other people to react to their accusations and to react to their behavior. There are 3 aspects of the walking wounded that we want you to understand. And I'm going to illustrate that through some stories based on my own personal experiences as well as some of my interactions with clients. The victim, again, the 3 aspects of the walking wounded: the victim, the victimizer, and the rescuer. You're going to get familiar with those terms, right? I either behave like the victim, I go into being the victimizer, or I act as the rescuer in that situation. And most importantly, as we talk about through this video, we're going to talk about how to stop ourselves from playing into their drama. Right? Because that's exactly what it is we go in and based on their behavior and their defenses and their reaction, we then get pulled in and we get sucked into that drama, right? And it's interesting for me because I have a mother who absolutely is, the personification of the walking wounded, right? And she's 87. But that recognition of it, but still sometimes in my mind, it's like, it's like you want to go in and it's like, no, wait, you gotta, have to stay out, right? So you start to feel there's a pull, right? That they bring us into that drama, and you're always having to keep yourself on the outside of that. And that's what we're going to talk about, because that's how we stay in our own power. That's how we make sure that we're not giving away our power or our authority. And again, that's how we stay in that relationship dynamic in a way that's satisfying and whole for us. So why is this information important? Why do we want you to understand about the walking wounded? Why do we want you to understand about their behavior and the things that they do in their interactions? Well, first and foremost, it's because we want you to be equipped to prevent, misunderstandings, to prevent reactions, and to not get into that fighting to no avail that can get triggered when you're dealing with the walking wounded. Okay? So when we understand this information, we can start to watch for it. We can consider how it shows up in our relationships and the behavior of others. And then again, we can be more consciously aware of how we're going to respond in that situation. The other thing it really helps us to do is get an understanding of this victim archetype and what are those defenses that they use. And again, that's all wrapped up in this walking wounded. So we can start to name behavior. We can look at behavior objectively and saying, oh, they're coming at this from their victim. I don't need to respond in that way. What do we need to do differently? Okay. And then last but not least, it's that empowering, right? Because this is all about powering up your innate potential. And in order to do that, you need to feel empowered. And empowerment in this case is about us choosing not to act out of the rescuer or to really sort of be able to deflect against being painted as the bad guy, the girl, or the victimizer, or to be vilified in that interaction, right? And being able to hold our power and have those boundaries that are so important for us in terms of building our confidence and achieving our potential. So what are you going to get from this? Right? It's like, what are you going to walk away with? Well, you're going to be able to recognize those elements of the victim narcissistic behavior. And that's a huge, huge win. I know even for me, even with my clients and in my client situations, that ability to immediately recognize where the pattern of behavior is coming from allows me to shift gears and move into being more effective. But we also want you to really be aware of when you go into rescuing or defending yourself from the accusations or the attacks of the victim, because this is part of what we're trying to break in that pattern, right? So we the narcissistic defenses, the walking wounded, they pull us in, but we're trying to recognize our own reaction, our own trigger. What do we do in response in order to be able to shift our behavior? And then we can start to move out of defending by assuming assuming one of the positions that they are using, right? Because that's what we do. We go into that dynamic working off of their approach of the walking wounded. Okay. So for context, right? Remember we said with the walking wounded, there's 3 approaches that they're taking: victim, victimizer, rescuer. So let's talk about the victim position. And the victim position is all about wanting to be rescued by someone else or thinking the worst of others, right? That they're out to get you. They have evil intentions, that there's this underlying agenda that is driving their behavior and their interactions with you. And the other piece about the victim is they really don't take responsibility for their choices or the passivity that's showing up in their lives that leads to their unhappiness. And there is this aspect of distortion that comes in when they are taking the victim position. They distort what others are saying, what others are doing. They accuse people of hurting them. Now, I'm going to tell, and I've got to tell stories because I really want to bring this to life for you. And when we get into talking about these stories, normal and natural, but I mentioned earlier, so I have an 87-year-old mother who very much lives out of her victim, gives me lots and lots of stories that I can share here. And I will try and mix it up a little bit, but I have to go after this one around the victim. And that she used, which is a great example. My mother was undergoing some medical treatment and had a very good, caring doctor. I had the opportunity to interact with him. I saw how carefully he was handling her, how he was trying to be very clear and very patient and very tolerant. Well, she's finished the course of treatment with this doctor, and now the stories, he's out to get me, he had it in for me, he was giving me the wrong drugs. It's all of this drama that now comes out from it. And because, again, narcissistic defense, walking wounded, there were times where she pushed up against his patience, that he didn't have the time that perhaps she wanted, or where he got more directive with her about what she needed to do, or where he was giving her information, objective information about the risks associated with her course of treatment or following it or not following it. But now to hear her tell the story is like, he just tries to scare people and he just wanted to scare me. And every single interaction, my mother has a story along this lines of how she has been victimized or is the victim in that particular interaction. Now, when I was a kid growing up, I didn't recognize or I didn't know this. As a grown-up, when she talks to me, I practice a certain level of empathy, but then I redirect the conversation. I don't get pulled in, and I definitely don't try to argue with her over her perspective because I know it's distorted. I know it's not real, but these are the stories she tells herself so she can stay in that place of the victim position, because that is the narcissistic wound, the narcissistic place that she is working from. Okay. And we see it. I see it in the workplace. If we talk about not taking responsibility for their choices or for their passivity, we see this all the time with leaders where they will ask sort of, why hasn't this been done, or where are you at with that? Or, if you saw there was a need for that, why didn't you step into it? Because now you're complaining about the impact or the circumstances of it. And I have a really good example where a client I was just talking to yesterday, and they had tasked a group of individuals with something, and these individuals are all talking as though they were somehow, victims of what they had been asked to do because it was unrealistic. There wasn't enough definition. They really weren't clear on what was expected of them. And of course, from my client's perspective, they gave a ton of clarity around what was expected of them, but they did also want these folks to come together and try and work it out themselves. But they all went into this place of passivity, and they're unhappy. They're all agreeing it doesn't work. It's completely dysfunctional, but none of them are working towards trying to resolve it. Instead, they've gone into, we are the victims of a decision that our bosses made, and there's nothing we can do about it. We're helpless, and they did this to us, right? And that's the language that gets used. And it's really interesting in talking it through with my client, because my client's getting upset, right? Visibly upset over the fact that this is how they're articulating it. And I said, it's not that you've done something wrong. It's that this is the place that they've chosen to go in response to it. They could have come back to him at any point in time and said, can you give us more direction? Can you come to the first meeting with us and really help us work through some of these issues or struggles we're having? Instead, they've all decided to take the position of being the victim in that circumstance. So really helpful for them to kind of understand it and think about it and start to separate out from what's going on in that dynamic so we can problem solve. How do we need to lead this group going forward? The second approach, the second position of the walking wounded is the victimizer, right? So instead of taking it in as though I'm the victim here, is they turn it around and they victimize others. They are so quick to deflect blame or responsibility, right? They believe that they're being logical, they justify their attacks on others, and they lash out, they criticize, they're demeaning, they're devaluing, and they will accuse others without fact checking. They will tell people that they are wrong and that they don't know what they're talking about, right? And they will belittle people for bringing up information or bringing up information that is contrary. And again, this is one, it's like you see people get pulled into it because they want to defend themselves when they're being, when the person's taking the narcissistic defenses position of the walking wounded, of being the victimizer, okay? The other one that we see all the time from those that are taking this position is the expectation that people read their minds. Now, I joke about it. I mean, wouldn't it be awesome, right? It's like, what? You couldn't read my mind? You couldn't figure it out? But really, when we are the walking wounded and working out of the victimizer, of the victim archetype, is really they will not take responsibility for asking for what they need, believing instead that others should just know it without having to express it, right? That you should just know, and I shouldn't have to tell you. And we hear this going on in relationships all the time between spouses, right? Well, I shouldn't need to tell him that I need to be romanced. He should just know that. Or I shouldn't need to tell her that, I need information presented to me in this way, or that I need a little bit of a break when I come home. As though, everybody else is to blame for not knowing what it is that we know inside of ourselves, for not living in our heads and being able to understand without us articulating it. And so what happens is the victimizer then gets triggered when other people are not attuning themselves to our needs and meeting those needs. And then what they'll do is they'll withdraw, they'll cut the person off, or they'll vilify them with no opportunity to actually resolve the conflict. We see this in the workplace so often with managers expecting employees to just know what to do without actually telling them, and then getting upset when they fail to meet their expectations. The other place that I've seen this a lot in my personal experience is in the education system for my kids, where my kids didn't understand something that the teacher was expecting of them or teaching them. And when my child went back to ask for more information or more clarity, the teacher would lash out at them, saying they should know and they should just be able to figure out and they shouldn't be asking these questions and they should just leave it alone, right? And again, it's a defense, right? It's a defense that gets triggered, and again, they're deflecting the responsibility from making sure that things happen the way they need to happen, okay? So the last one I'm going to talk about is the rescuer. So this is the third approach that we see used by the victim, the walking wounded, from the perspective of the three different approaches that they will use when they're working out of their narcissistic defenses. Now, what the walking wounded will do is they will make it look like they're okay, that they're fine, everything's good, rather than actually owning their issues or their needs. What they do is they put all of their focus and all of their energy on what others are doing wrong and helping those people to figure it out, okay? They will fail to set boundaries because they will extend themselves into other people and fixing them, jumping in to rescue them, trying to assert their power over other people. They're always busy, they're always on because they really want to look and feel strong and competent. And by doing that, what ends up happening is when they're working out of the rescuer approach, they end up simply fostering dependence on themselves, okay? So, and again, we can see this happening in personal contexts, right? When you think about, an encounter you might have had in a relationship where you think they're doing something all wrong and you really you decide you're going to help them and you're going to show them the errors of their way, or you're going to do it for them. It's really because you've gone into rescuer. I have this conversation with my son all the time because this is one of the, the victim, part of the victim persona that he will move into, which was the rescuer, which is always finding and dating, girls, women that are, sort of the walking wounded who come at everything from this hypersensitivity, or where, he's always doing something wrong and he keeps trying and he then tries to problem solve for them. And he tries to help them, tries to act as their therapist, their parent, and ultimately it doesn't serve him, because what ends up happening is he can never do anything, right. And but this is the place where he goes to feel powerful because it allows him to feel really competent in that dynamic, but it doesn't necessarily serve him. But again, at his age, appropriate, working through some of these things and starting to learn and to understand it and build awareness into it so he can recognize when he's moving into that pattern. I do this. He probably learned it from me. So I have to take some ownership here, because this is kind of my go-to out of all of the victim approaches. Rescuer is the one that I'm probably most likely to go into, is to make everything better for everyone else, right? But then I don't have boundaries. I don't protect myself. I don't protect my needs. And one of the things I had to learn, through my 20s and my 30s, especially as I got more and more into the work that I do in consulting and coaching and leadership development, behavioral change, was that not everybody wants to be helped. And really understanding that and just focusing on the experience as opposed to feeling like I have to go into rescuing them in order for me to feel competent and to feel strong, because that was about me versus about what they need, okay? And so as we wrap up, I would just want to remind you that this is about really learning to recognize the defensive strategies of the narcissistic personality disorder, the defensive strategies that are used by narcissists, right? So that you can set boundaries, so that you can hold your power, that you can start to differentiate between the things that you need to react to and how it is that you really want to respond in order to, again, ensure that you are coming through that interaction and that dynamic whole, and then you're separating out what is about them versus what is about you. We always want to look at these interactions and say we need to stop giving our power and our authority for ourselves away. We really have to hold it. We don't have to get pulled into their drama. We don't have to take their attacks. We don't have to get into arguing with them, and really, sort of resisting that impulse to shift into rescuer, right? So we don't want to get victimized with them. We don't want to move into victim, and we don't want to move into rescuer. And one of the things we always say is you may be better off without them than with them, but we know we can't always make that happen. So our next step is to really recognize our role within that dynamic. Many people get pulled into avoiding the walking wounded, right? Walking on eggshells around them for fear of triggering their defensiveness. And that's one of the things is like, you don't have to change their behavior or avoid it to have a relationship with them, okay? It is possible to have a relationship with them, because if you go into avoid or you focus on trying to change their behavior, then that's just you feeling victimized, right? And then turning others into the victim in the process. So you need to respond differently to their behavior. And it is a skill. It takes practice. It takes awareness. It takes that ability that in the moment to recognize when you're starting to get pulled in and to really be able to separate from it. Defending ourselves against their attacks, their devaluations, their accusation, or even becoming emotional just actually leads to greater distress for everyone, right? So it doesn't work. So I wanted to give you a couple of things to think about as we wrap up here today. Think about a time when you reacted to someone thinking the worst of you, or when you were blaming or accusing someone without evidence. Think about how you feel when someone has done that to you, right? How does that feel? And what might you try to do next time it happens? Because it will happen again. The walking wounded are everywhere around us, right? Again, they're at work, they're at home, they're in our in-laws, they're in our family members. We can even run into them in public spaces and we don't even know them. The walking wounded are out there because we all have that narcissistic wound, and we can all move into that place of feeling compelled to use our narcissistic defenses. Walking wounded are everyday people, and they are just doing their best to survive, right? They react defensively without thinking. And often their wound hits our wound, and so we react. So we need to cultivate compassion. We need to stop defending ourselves, and we need to facilitate the conversation to what it is that is the actual issue that really truly needs to be resolved. Okay. With that, I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to leave you here. Don't forget to join us next week. We're going to continue along talking about different narcissistic defenses, the behaviors we see, how we interact with them. And next week we're taking a little bit of a flip because we're looking at the other side of it, and we're going to be talking about permissive behavior and how that plays out as just yet again another narcissistic defense. So until then, hop on over to our YouTube channel, Dranitsaris-Hilliard.com. Sorry, that's our website, Dranitsaris-Hilliard on our YouTube. We've got all of our videos, tons of great content. We're throwing new stuff up there every single week. You can always catch these, and you can catch some of these that have happened before. If you're here inside of our Facebook group, don't forget to hop on over to our videos. We've got lots of great content in there. We do also have some exciting things coming up. We're going to be launching our podcast series, Dismantling Dysfunction. That's going to be happening just in a few weeks, so not too far away. And don't forget, always encourage you to read more about the victim archetype in our book, Power Past the Imposter Syndrome. Thanks everyone for joining me. And if you're catching me here live or catching me on the replay, whether it's in YouTube or Facebook, please feel free, comment, share your stories, let us know what you're getting from these videos, and we will be there and responding to you. Until next time, don't forget to power up your innate potential.